Hi, my name is Angie Rasco, and I'm here to talk to you about Erikson's psychosocial development, his 8 stages that needed to be resolved by the environment around the children as they grow. And if they were not resolved, then there would be a crisis. If they were resolved, then there would be a virtue left behind. So the first stage is trust versus mistrust, and that would start when the children are born. And that would be in relation to how the parents are reacting towards the child, how teachers are reacting towards the child, how family members are reacting, how they're taking care of every basic need, feeding, clothing, bathrooming, and touch, responding to the cries, talking to, the way that they're looking into the child's eyes. All of those things would start to create trust in the child. If the family members would be neglectful, they would not provide food consistently, or maybe sometimes you have a lot and sometimes you wouldn't have any, that would start to create mistrust. If the touch was harsh, possibly spanking, or just rough with the child, then that would also causing pain. That would also create mistrust in the child, and that would leave the child left in more of a crisis state as they physically developed and moved on to the next stage. They wouldn't have as much to go with as the other children who would have received those things and had achieved the virtue of hope. And so that would be stage 2, would be the 18-month-year-old would start developing autonomy versus shame. And so they're starting to become independent. They still need support of their caregivers that are around them, the teachers, the parents, and that autonomy really adds a lot to their self-worth later on in identifying who they are, or they might be shamed for doing something, making a mistake, or made to feel like they are a bad child, and that would cause them to have that shame, and that would be an underlying feeling that they would be receiving and holding on to that crisis between autonomy versus shame, and that they would hold on to in their hearts into the next stage, and it really would definitely affect all the other stages. And so now we're moving on to the 3-year-old in stage 3, where it's initiative versus guilt. So it's, can I take the lead? Can I do this? Can I take a step out? Or am I going to get in trouble for being who I am, and start to feel guilty about it, and being filled with guilt? And so that could lead to a crisis of guilt, or it could lead to initiative, where the child is learning how to lead and become more independent, and knowing that they would have a purpose. Their virtue would be purpose, and they would take that all the way to 5-year-olds, where that would be stage 4, and they're going to learn industry versus inferiority. So they're learning about the world around them. They're learning again about the adults around them, the support that they need, if they can ask for help, if they cannot ask for help, what they can do, what they cannot do. And they are trying a lot of new things at this stage. They're writing, they're learning math, they're learning even maybe new languages. So if they get it, and they've got the right support, they've got the right encouragement, then they're going to be able to have that industry. And if they do not, they're going to have that crisis, that inferiority, where they feel bad about themselves. It could lead later on into some depression and some other types of fragmentation, where they're just really not confident in who they are, and they feel even maybe fearful about taking the next step. So the next step, having received the virtue of competency, knowing that they're who they are, and that they can do it. Whatever it is that they're trying to do, they can do it. You'd move on to stage 5, and that would be around 12 years old. And so that's identity versus role confusion, as they're really trying to figure out, who am I in this world? And now I see a lot of the middle schoolers are even struggling with some sexuality and struggling with what do they want to be when they grow up, and who are my friends right now, and how do I relate to them. So if we come to a place of crisis where we don't have the right support, we don't have the right adult interactions where they're speaking to us about the thoughts and feelings of others, how relationships work, the experiences that they're learning, that they're okay, that there's a lot of changes going on in their body, that there's hormones coming in, and sometimes they feel things that don't actually it's not a result of their own self, it's just their physiological body that's changing. And so that's stage 5, and if they come to crisis at that time, that would be role confusion, where they don't know where they are, they don't know who they are, and that can lead to definitely a lot of problems later on down the way, and even right then and there, right? So hopefully they get it, and their virtue is fidelity. They can do it. They know who they are. They're true to themselves. They're true to the world. And then you reach the 18-year-old level, where that's stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. We're starting to learn about really in-depth relationships. We're making decisions about partners and marriages, and how intimate can I get? How safe can I be? And so they need a lot of support from their intimate other at that point. They need to be feeling very safe. And if they didn't get all these other things, if they didn't get the trust, if they didn't get the autonomy, if they didn't get initiative, if they didn't get industry, they didn't get identity, they're really going to have a really challenging time in this stage 6, where they might start to isolate themselves. They might start to withdraw from their friends and their peers, and even their colleagues, and people where they're at work. So it's very important that they get all of those other stages, and that they get this stage, intimacy. It can a lot of times define success in careers, success in college, and get that virtue of love, right? They're learning how to love others now that they've had a great foundation with their family. And as they're learning to love others, they're going to move on to stage 7, which isn't until they're about 40 years old. So they've got 22 years to learn intimacy versus isolation. And that is probably not long enough for a lot of people, because intimacy is a very hard, vulnerable thing to learn. But once they hopefully get it, or do not, then they're going to be struggling with generativity versus stagnation. And are they going to be generous to others? They're going to be hopefully well established in their careers. They're going to be able even to support others. They're going to be able to give. They're going to be able to volunteer. They're going to be able to share, hopefully with their family members, with their children, generationally, that they would be able to be generous. And if not, it could lead to stagnation, which is like a standstill, right? So they're not going to be generous. They could even regress all the way back to that egocentric behavior that we all know the 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds have, and it might pop up again, or who knows if it would have carried all the way through and maybe never went away. So that would be stage 7, and then they're going to move through with the virtue of care. If they've received that generativity, or they've obtained that generativity and mastered it, then they're going to move to stage 8, which when they're 65 years old, they're probably retiring, and they've got integrity, they've got wisdom, they know who they are. They can give from the generativity stage, and they can impart that experiences that they've learned, and they come with confidence. But if not, it could be that crisis where they're going to be in despair, which would be depression. A lot of people, after they retire, they have no more purpose because they did not invest in their social emotional development. So if it was all about them all the way through the stages, then they really can start to have some mental health issues pop up, and that despair can turn into depression, and depression can lead to all kinds of other things. And so if they do get it, that integrity will lead them to the wisdom that I was talking about, and that's really where you want to be at the end of your life, is that wise old person. And so that's Erikson's psychosocial development. And next we talk about social emotional development. Erikson is one of the foundational leaders for developing social emotional development theory because of his psychosocial development stages. Some of the concepts that we're gleaning from this social emotional development come from when the infants and toddlers are learning initially from their families, from their teachers, from their caregivers. It's really a big deal in preschool to have these terms and these responses to children down. Some people have it very naturally because they went through Erikson stages and they were able to meet those, each one of those stages with gaining the virtues as well. And some people did not get it, but nevertheless, there's still time to grow. So if one of those stages, or many of the stages, you did not meet the virtues and you were left in crisis, it is really never too late. You can always work on yourself. You can always reach out to counselors, to therapists. There's different support groups to learn anything really you want to learn. And one of the ways a lot of people learn is through education. And that's why we have our child development classes. That's why we're going to school to be teachers. We're learning about how to take care of others. And some of us, we're just natural at it, and others, we have to work at it a little bit. So one of the terms is responsive caregiving, and that's the key to healthy growth, development, and learning. And again, like Erikson's stages, that's where there's a lot of nurturing going on in the early years. The parents are there, they're giving support, not too much support, but they are giving support when the child needs it, and they're taking care of their basic needs and some more. The emotional security comes along with close relationships with adults. That's when they're being hugged and loved and led by the adults and respected. And really when the adult sits down with them and helps pull out their strength. Temperament is something that's very interesting. It's influenced by the culture around the child, but it's that like thread that runs through the child, where it's kind of the flavor of your emotional expression. So you might be a very exciting person, and maybe you have positive thoughts all the time, which would be a wonderful temperament to have, or you might tend to avoid and withdraw. And so those are just some of the ways that temperament is influenced and also influences our behavior. Affective, that would be the tone of voice the parent uses toward the child. So they might be very positive and very kind and very gentle. I know households where the parents never yelled, never got upset. They're very even-keeled, and that is a wonderful household to watch. Just to be an observer, a fly on the wall of those households is amazing. And I think typically, though, people do tend to lose their temper. Their tone of voice is not always very positive, but you do have self-control. And so when you master that self-control, you can purpose yourself to have a positive tone of voice and not raise your voice at your children, and it is still effective. Empathy is understanding others' feelings. So when a child, say an infant or a toddler, when they see someone crying, Mom, what's going on? They might not know what's happening, but as parents, as educators, we can train the young child that the other child is hurting inside, and that's why they're crying, or the mom is crying, and that she's hurting inside because of whatever situation it was, and that those situations happen and that we can cry, and that it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be